No time to say hello, goodbye. A.W. Frickelstein, I grumbled under my breath, reaching down with one hand to inspect the rip up the leg of my shorts. It wouldn't have been quite as big a deal, I suppose, had I not just bought them earlier that week. Luckily, despite how short they were. I'm not going to lie. I consider my legs the most attractive part of me, and I don't mind showing them off. The tear stopped short of actually revealing anything I'd prefer to leave unseen. What did you say? Leela giggled beside me, adjusting her glasses. Despite having been my best friend for pretty much all my life. Apparently she had never heard me curse, or had, possibly, just forgotten. Cheap piece of junk. I ignored her question, my fidgeting finally drawing her brown eyes down to the site of the tragedy. 2 days. Can you believe that? She shrugged. I'm seeing it. A brunette ponytail pendulumed halfway down her back as she shook her head. You should see about getting a refund. Probably won't do anything, I said sourly. Annoyed, I brushed a strand of golden hair from out of my blue eyes. It was always the blonde that got in my face. The black was nice and obedient, hanging there right above my shoulders. But the one little patch of yellow right at the front I'd left alone just had to be sassy. Sides, I think Rita's working today. She might not be doing returns, she suggested, so sweetly, so very naive. Obviously unaware of the way the real world worked. She had such an innocent look on her face. I couldn't bring myself to enlighten her. Just smiled sadly down at her. She was about 6 inches shorter than me, even though she was a couple of months older, and still had a smattering of freckles and a touch of baby fat, all of which sometimes made it hard to take her seriously. It did explain why she was such a popular babysitter, however. Speaking of which, it was about then that her latest charge, an unquenchable energetic little boy, ran up to us, hands full of various leaves. Look, look, he called, thrusting them up into Leela's face. Great job, she complimented him, slipping a Ziploc from her purse to put the leaves into. Do you have enough for your project yet? He hesitated for a second or two before nodding. So Leela said, why don't you go get a few more, just in case? He nodded, then quickly turned and scampered off. At a distance, even I couldn't deny he was quite adorable. That's when kids are the best. When they're far away. I've missed this, Leela said, tucking the bag away into her purse. Leaves? I teased. There's usually quite a few of them in the park. But we haven't been here in so long, she stuck out her tongue. Smart ass. I've just been busy, I shrugged, staring up into the branches of a nearby tree. You know how it is. I've got ballet all the time. And when I don't have that, the band's wanting to practice. And then I still had to do homework and spend some time with Keith. At least it's summer now, right? And tell Keith you spend enough time with him in the band. You need some Leela time, too. I smiled. Yeah, I'm sure that'll go over well. The kid came running back while we were giggling at that. After Leela took his latest haul, she decided it was time for them to get going. I didn't really have anything else to do. But getting sucked into some weird daycare art project wasn't high on my list of things to do for that day. So I parted ways with them there. CYA, Leela waved. Bye, Sky, the boy chirped. Bye, you, I answered, drawing a blank when it came to actually remembering the kid's name. I don't know how Leela ever managed to keep them all straight. I tugged gently at my shorts, wondering if I'd be able to talk my mom into sewing them up. She wasn't a fan of them in the first place. And I'm not entirely sure she knew how to run a sewing machine. Or if we even owned one. Grandma could do it in about 15 seconds. But she lived all the way across town. Not to mention that she would be more likely to throw them away if I told them they were mine. My family, if you hadn't guessed. is a bunch of prudes. Leela, on the other hand, was pretty good at all that domestic stuff. Maybe I could take them over to her house later on. I turned around to see if she was still within shouting distance. She wasn't. Before fishing my cell out of my pocket. As I lowered my gaze to the screen, I noticed something, or rather someone, from the corner of my eye, sitting on a park bench. I glanced back up to get a better look, and make sure it was really her. I could have sworn the bench was empty when we'd passed it a minute or two before. And yet there sat the girl. Long brown hair blowing softly in the wind. Reading. She either always read books with similar covers, or had been working on the same book for a couple weeks now. I'd seen her a few times. Almost as if she were following me around. Though she never got close enough to make me too nervous. Nor did she ever look up from her reading, at least while I was watching. Still, it was odd enough that, having nothing better to do, I decided to get a little closer to her. Maybe even strike up a conversation with her. At least that was my intention. Until my phone began its violent spasms, nearly jumping out of my palm before I could flip it open. "Hey, babe," Keith's voice came from it. "What's up? Come on. We don't need." I could hear our drummer, Martin, saying in the background. "Shut up," Keith hissed before speaking to me again. "We were just wondering if you're planning on coming today." I had already worked out what had happened. Of course. So I quickly went on the offensive. "You told me we weren't rehearsing until Wednesday. How am I supposed to keep up with all these surprise practices if nobody tells me anything?" I heard him sigh. "It is Wednesday, Sky." "No, it's not," I told him, matter-of-factly. "I watched The Office last night." There was a pause. Some muffled talking I couldn't quite make out. Finally, he got back to me with a question. "Was it on DVD?" For once, I was glad neither of us had video phones. Though I'm pretty sure he could actually hear my blush as I quietly said, "I'll be there in a few minutes. See you then." And that was that for my investigation of the book girl for that day. Which was just as well, since, when I tried to get one last look at her, she was already gone. A moment later, so was I. Luckily, Martin's house was only a couple blocks from the park. And I knew the way to his basement by heart. Since Keith had used to take me there to hang out. Since Martin's parents were rarely around. It was also fortunate that, other than my voice, which I was prone to carrying around with me all the time, I didn't have any instrument to have to go home and fetch. While I would have loved to know how to play the bass, I'd never gotten around to actually learning. They were already playing by the time I got there. Keith and Martin, with that weird Chris, who was the actual bassist. I'm not sure where the boys had found him. Or where he lived. Truth be told, I'm not 100% sure Chris was his name. I think that was what Keith called him when he introduced us. But I could be mistaken, and I had never spoken to him myself. Or even heard him speak to anyone else. "Glad you could join us." Martin snarked from behind the drums once they'd finished the song. And Keith set aside his guitar. Walked over to give me a kiss. While I like being on the tall side, it's still nice to have a boyfriend who is bigger than I am. Standing next to him still makes me feel a bit delicate and even cute. His hair, which was very light brown, almost blonde, was longer than mine, and he probably spent more time on it than I did on mine. Despite usually keeping it in a ponytail when we weren't at rehearsal. "Sorry." I smiled up at him. "I was out with Leela. And I ripped my new shorts." "The ones you just bought?" I saw his eyes move downwards. "Those would be the new ones, yeah. Can you two discuss this later?" I glared over at Martin, but he was more than willing to return it in kind. "Chris has got to be out of here in an hour." "Chill, I rolled my eyes. I'm ready whenever you are. I'm not sure if he meant for me to hear the "We were ready half an hour ago," he mumbled under his breath. But I have a feeling he did. All right. It's just about quitting time. So let's call it a day. All right? I clapped my hands a couple times, happy for having gotten through that sentence without making it rhyme, as it usually ended up doing, much to my chagrin. I might be teaching a bunch of kids, but I had no desire to do so while sounding like a Dr. Seuss character. Also, I'm not fond of hats. Mess up my hair. Truth be told, as much as I hated to admit it, I was feeling a bit proud of the little brats as they filed past me, clad in their leotards and tights, little tie-on skirts fluttering. There were a couple who were getting pretty good, or at least in the range of not bad that would lead to them being upgraded to a different class. And they'd all managed to keep their little panties dry the whole hour, for once. At least as far as I knew. I couldn't help but snicker as one walked by, the slight bulge of a diaper pretty evident around her bottom. She looked up at me with a hurt expression, which I countered by pretending not to know what her problem was. Seriously, I never have any clue how old children actually are. And it wasn't like she was the only one who had problems. Nor was she the oldest in the class. Admittedly, the older ones, some almost teenagers, were, as a whole, much better at getting to the bathroom on time. They also tended to be fairly geeky and awkward, and probably would have rather been reading at home than with me. I can't say my feelings were hurt by that thought, considering I would also have rather been at home. But I got to take my own classes for free by teaching them. And I made a little spending money as well. Nothing stunning, but it's better than flipping burgers or something. So, all in all, not a bad deal. And it gave me a healthy appreciation for the true level of Leela's insanity, actually choosing to spend almost all of her time around these. Literally, in some cases, since she babysat some of my students. Loud, disobedient, leaky little beasts. One of which had not followed the others out, and was, instead, standing in the middle of the room, glancing up expectantly at me. Perfect. Miss Sky. She spoke up after she realized I wasn't going to do so, as I was busy doing a few final warm-down stretches. Yeah? I tried to avoid actually looking at her. Yet that proved more difficult than you might imagine, considering the mirrors lining the walls. Next Monday, I'm going to visit my grandma. And she lives way over in Springfield. So I might be late. Finally, those little green eyes vanished as she ducked her head to stare at her fidgeting foot. You know the policy, I sighed. Either show up on time or not at all. I guess I might have sounded a little meaner than I needed to. But I didn't make the rules. They were the dance studio's. Not that most teachers bothered to enforce them. Okay, she said quietly, slinking off with her eyes still downcast. She wasn't a bad kid, really. In fact, she was always very quiet and polite. And not half bad with the whole dancing thing. Megan. I called as she reached the door. It's Melanie, she corrected me. Yeah, okay. You did good today. She brightened up considerably. Really? I nodded, and she was actually smiling when she left. That was very touching. Dale clutched at his heart as he came into the room. Are you two going to be BFFs now? Get those little necklaces, and come up with your own secret codes. Dale wasn't the only male instructor at the studio. But he was the only one who I was pretty certain was not gay. He made up for it by being nearly as annoying as he was cute. He was a couple of inches shorter than me, despite being in his 20s. Which might be why he felt the need to pick on me. Or he might have just been a prick. It's hard to tell. That was the plan, I told him. Maybe we'll go see the Barney movie together. He nodded, furrowing his brow in his own weird little way. I think he thinks it makes him look extra serious. Which is a warning sign that he's about to attempt to be humorous. Well, I promise I won't tell her you've already been. Wouldn't want to ruin that for you. You're a doll. His students were starting to come in and set their stuff down. So I began my own exit. Mom was probably already waiting for me in the car. His voice followed me as I left, and in my mind, I saw him nod again. You speak the truth. I had wasted enough time that, by the time I actually left, all of my students were already gone, and their mothers as well. If this job had taught me anything, it was that parents, even when they weren't yours, almost always had something to complain about. And everything was always my fault. One mom had even pulled her kid from my class within the first couple weeks. It hadn't mattered much to me. Though I'd been nervous it would get me fired. Luckily, and obviously, it did not, so all was good. How did it go? Mom asked when I climbed into the passenger's seat. She was still all dressed up from work, and she looked quite pretty. It was fine, I shrugged, fastening my seat belt so she would start the car. Being polite, I inquired about her day, knowing that I was inviting a deluge of real estate talk. It was all right. It wasn't like I had to pay attention to it. And it kept me from having to make any real conversation with her during the trip, leaving me free to devote all my attention to staring blankly out the window. We were almost home when I saw her. And in my surprise, I couldn't help but blurt out, "That's her. Patricia Hartman." My mother sounded quite confused. "No, just, someone from school." I settled back down, readjusting my MP3 player's earbuds, and watched as we passed the long-haired girl, reading even as she walked down the sidewalk. I tried to get a glimpse of the cover of the book, see if it was anything I recognized, but, unsurprisingly, it wasn't. Then again, I didn't spend much time cruising the stacks at the library either. Big loss on my part, I'm sure. I couldn't quite tell what the picture on the cover was meant to be. I thought it was probably one of those books that tried to seem smarter than it really was, pasting some abstract thing on the front and leaving the readers to figure out how, or if, it is related to the actual text on their own. I didn't really have time to finish listening to even one song before Mom pulled into our driveway. I could have walked, and probably should have more often than I did, for the exercise. But Mom had offered to bring me home, and I figured, why not? Mom tossed the keys over the roof of my car. I caught them easily, giving her an uncertain thanks in return. I wasn't sure if that was really what I was supposed to say in that situation or not. Maybe she should have, seeing as it was her who was borrowing my car, until hers got out of the shop. That seemed like it would be a bit awkward, though. Even though my nose couldn't decipher just what it was. A pleasant smell greeted me upon going in the front door, along with my dad's call of, "Welcome home, honey." "Thanks, dear," I replied, giggling as Mom shoved my shoulder lightly. She was a few inches shorter than me, but probably a few pounds heavier. I tossed my MP3 player onto my bed after going to collect a kiss on the forehead from my dad, who was still taller than me, and checking to see what he was making. I still wasn't positive, but I knew that if he was making it, it would turn out delicious. I kicked off my shoes, started wriggling out of my ballet clothes so I could put on something normal, all the while heading towards my desk to see if my cell phone had finished charging yet. Except that my cell phone was not where I'd left it. The charger was still plugged in, cord laying stretched across the desktop, but it wasn't attached to anything. I slipped the leotard back up my arm, kneeling down to look under the desk, then standing back up to look in the drawer. "Mom!" I yelled, storming back out of my room. "Sure, She had been at work since well before I'd left, but there was no way Dad would have done this by himself. It had to have been her plan, though what she was expecting to find on there. I had no idea. Numbers for drug dealers, maybe. An orgy hotline. It wasn't like she didn't already know Keith. He'd eaten at our house a bunch of times. And as far as I knew, she liked him well enough. "What is it, Sky?" she asked, stepping out of her room, taking off her watch. "Is there anything you want to ask me?" I asked icily. "Anything you're wondering about?" Mom sighed. "Sky, what is it?" So she wanted to pretend nothing was going on. "Fine. I want my cell phone back," I said, holding my hand out. She sighed again, turning back towards her room. "I just got home," she reminded me. Like I had forgotten somehow. "I didn't take your phone." "How do you know it went missing when you were at work?" I inquired suspiciously. "I didn't say that." "Maybe it's been missing all day." "I'm pretty sure if it had been, I'd have heard about it before now." She used her look on me, and her annoyance actually made me wonder if it really had been Dad on his own. I don't appreciate being accused of things under my own roof. "Well, somebody took it," I glowered, crossing my arms. "The battery died on me, so I left it here to charge, and now." But as I spoke, glancing back towards my desk, I saw something sitting there, connected to the little black cord snaking down to the outlet below. "And now what?" I looked back over at her, not quite meeting her eyes. It must have fallen off of my desk or something. "Sorry," I managed to mumble before backing away and closing the door. Sure enough, my cell was sitting there, right where I'd left it, as if it had been there all along. "I must be going crazy," I said to myself, unplugging it and flipping it open. I had a voicemail waiting for me from Keith, nothing too long, just saying he wanted to see me later that night. My eyes darted over to my MP3 player as I listened to it, making sure it was still on my bed. It was. Even so, I set my phone down on top of my dresser, where I could keep an eye on it while I checked. "Look, I know you're upset, hon," Leela said, patting my hand. "But could you be a little quieter? Olive is trying to take a nap, you know." For a split second, I almost did the exact opposite, just to spite her. But somehow I managed to remind myself that none of this was actually her fault. Nor was I even angry at her. I even managed and only partially hissed, "I'm not upset." "Whatever you say," Leela shrugged, picking up the knife to resume cutting apples. "So, what happened after that?" I took one of the apple slices, snapped it in half. "Nothing," I replied, popping one of the halves into my mouth, nearly throwing the other half at Leela when she pointed a reproachful finger at me, as I'd seen her do when telling kids not to talk with their mouths full. "Except he asked me if I could drive him to some party this weekend." She gave an involuntary chuckle, immediately giving me an apologetic look after. "Seriously?" He said it, but I don't know if he was joking or not. We were both still sitting on his stupid porch swing in silence, and you know how he hates the quiet. He did mention yesterday his parents weren't letting him drive their car anymore, though, so who knows. I ate my other bit of apple, rolling my eyes at Leela's expression. "No, I didn't say I'd do it." "But did you say you wouldn't?" She raised her eyebrow briefly, before turning to set the plate. "Olive snack for after she got up, in the fridge." "Does leaving count?" "'Cause I did that." "That might be close enough." She smiled. "Now, are you sure you're all right?" "I'm fine," I told her. "Then we'll talk tomorrow, okay?" Olive gets really needy after a nap, and I don't need her telling her parents I spent all day hanging out with my friends. I sighed. What do they care? Well, I'm supposed to be hanging out with her, you know. Plus, her parents are actually paying me for it. Whatever, I shrugged, grabbing my purse and heading for the door. Like I care. I'll see you tomorrow, she promised. Whatever, I repeated, barely loud enough for her to hear it as I closed the door behind me. Like I needed her anyway. Let her play with that annoying little olive girl. I could certainly live, and quite happily so, without having to put up with her anymore. She was in my ballet class. Somewhere in the middle, age-wise, but damn close to the bottom in terms of skill. She wore these huge glasses, and always looked uncomfortable. I'd assumed she was just embarrassed because she knew that most of the younger girls were better than her. And would continue to be so until she miraculously grew new, less klutzy legs. But even at her house, she looked awkward. Like she just didn't fit into her surroundings. And if she was needier after a nap, I definitely didn't want to stick around for that. Every 3 seconds she'd been interrupting me, as I told Leela about how Keith had broken up with me for no real reason. Wanting more water. Or to know if it was all right if she ate lunch in her room. Or want to know why the sky was blue. Well, I don't remember that question specifically. But it wouldn't surprise me if she'd asked it, since she wanted to know everything else. The first few times I just told her to go Google it. But after a few unamused glares from Leela, who would then proceed to explain whatever to the girl at ridiculously great detail, I gave up, and, from then on, just sighed, folded my arms, and got real comfortable on the couch whenever I heard those clumsy little feet approaching. Stupid kids. And stupid boys, for that matter. I guess, if I thought about it, Keith actually having me come over to his house to break up with me was better than him just doing it over the phone. But I didn't want to think about it. If he wasn't going to give me any reasons for doing it, or any chance to apologize or try to make whatever I'd done wrong up to him. Not that I probably would have, of course. He might as well have just left me a voicemail. I realized I had stopped walking, and started to laugh at myself, only to find that I couldn't. Instead, I just felt my chest heaving, inches from sobbing. I don't need him, I growled to myself. I'm better off without him. I didn't really have a hard time believing that. But it was still a few minutes before I could get myself to start moving again, without feeling like I was going to fall apart. What was so wrong with me that he'd just had to get away? And why did I even care? This was for the best. I tried to stop, but as I walked slowly back home, my mind kept going, returning, unbidden, to the subject. The house was, of course, empty. At least for an hour or two more, depending on when Dad managed to get out of work. I grabbed the remote and laid down on the couch, only to find, a few minutes later, that I'd already flipped through all of the channels. And there was exactly nothing good, or even brainlessly entertaining, on. Though the inner debate leading to my decision was quite intense, I ended up not hurling the remote through the television screen before grabbing a Diet Coke from the fridge and closing myself into my room. There was equally nothing interesting to do there, unless I wanted to flip through the books that had been sitting on my shelf probably since I was 8 or 9. I didn't, nor did I have any interest in laying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Too much chance of thinking about things I'd rather not. At least if I was just there, in silence. But perhaps with the right accompaniment. Much as I loved it, my MP3 player wouldn't do the trick, either. I wanted to let it be loud, without actually blowing my eardrums out. So I pulled out my CD book, opened it to a random page, which turned out to be pretty much the last. Of course, the first CD I saw while flipping through my collection was one of Keith's. I stared at it for a minute or two, unsure of what to do, or even what to think, and then nearly put them all away. First, I took Keith's CD out and threw it to the other side of my bed, like a frisbee. I cracked a little smile. There was no reason to be down, after all. Why should I let him ruin my afternoon? The next page held another of his CDs, along with one I decided would work for background music. While I continued to look through my collection, it was surprising how many of his CDs I'd ended up with. I guess I'd borrowed them to rip onto my MP3 player, then forgot to give them back. I could be vindictive. Pretend I didn't know what he was talking about when he inevitably asked for them back. Maybe put a couple through the microwave and toss out the rest, but I was better than that. I had almost made it to the beginning when I spotted a CD I didn't recognize. Mostly plain silver, but with a ring of red. Curious, I replaced my nearly over-the-current selection with it, only to find that the music, while nice, was equally unfamiliar. I guess Olive was still being needy, because it took Leela a few rings to answer her cell. "Are you okay, S?" he asked, all urgent and scared, like she thought I was calling her from the edge of a bridge or something. Just how delicate did she think I was? "I'm fine, Leels," I rolled my eyes. "Look, did you ever lend me a CD with this, like, red ring on it?" "What?" "It's silver, and it has a red circle." She paused for a second, though my assumption that she might actually be thinking about my question was shattered when I heard her whispering, "Oh, that's pretty, sweetie." "You know, a CD," I reminded her. "It's round, got a hole in the center, makes." "I don't think it's mine," she interrupted. "Is it what you have playing now?" "Yeah," I said, holding the phone closer to the stereo for a second. "Sound familiar?" "Nope, not mine." "It's probably." She cut herself off. "Hey, did you find the cookies I made you?" "What? You made me cookies?" "I snuck them into your purse. Thought they might cheer you up a little. If they're shortbread, I'll love you forever." I dug through my purse, eventually finding a little container. Well, I was going to give you more tomorrow if you came to see me. But if you already love me forever, what's the point?" I smiled a little at her giggle. "Look, I have to go." "You sure you're all right? Would you please stop asking me that?" I sighed, starting to get annoyed. After we hung up, I stared at the CDs for a little longer, before deciding I'd gotten far enough for one day. It wasn't like Keith was breaking down my door to get them back or anything. I ended up back outside, not entirely sure how or why I'd made that decision. My car wasn't there, of course. Mom's car was still in the garage. Probably would be for a little while longer. Had to replace something that seemed pretty important, since its name had two complicated sounding words. I picked a direction. Any of them other than the one that went by Keith's house was fine, and started to walk, not really paying any attention to anything I was passing. So it came as quite a surprise when I nearly ran into somebody, only when looking up to apologize, to realize it was the reading girl. She stared at me with a blank, almost awed expression, mouth hanging ever so slightly open. I honestly don't know what came over me. "Why the hell are you following me, you freak?" I screamed, right in her face. "What do you want from me?" I shouldn't have been surprised that she turned and ran after that. I was more surprised to find myself following her. Her legs weren't quite as long as mine, but she was quite fast anyway, and much better at dodging around the other people hanging out on the sidewalks, like they didn't have anything better to do. I nearly knocked a couple of kids down, which slowed me enough that she managed to get up the steps and into the library, which I doubt I'd have even noticed otherwise. I forced myself to calm down as much as possible, not wanting to get thrown out before I reached my prey, while my heart did its best not to explode in my chest. The library was, as usual, not particularly busy, which made it easier to hear where the girl was, even though she was doing her best to be quiet. It also made it harder to pursue with any kind of speed, since I knew if I wasn't careful I'd just bring the librarians down on me, thus prematurely ending the hunt. I tiptoed through nonfiction, listening to her footsteps a few shelves over. Turning slightly, I could see her, or at least a strip of her chest, against which she was clutching that book. Through the empty spaces between tops of books and bottoms of shelves, she was breathing hard, finally giving me a reason to believe I wasn't horribly out of shape for feeling a little tired. She was walking in the opposite direction as me, and a little faster. If it came down to it, I could probably have caught her if I'd turned around. Met her when she hit the aisle. Instead, I kept going to the aisle on the opposite end of the shelves, turned the corner, and stopped, peeking again to make sure she was still there. Sure enough, she was, and now just right on the other side of the shelves I was looking through. She'd stopped moving, was now just standing there, all wide-eyed, shaking. Part of me felt bad. It wasn't too difficult to ignore that part until later. After all, she'd been following me for way too long for me to consider it a coincidence. Didn't I deserve to know what in the world was going on? I took it even more slowly then, keeping her in my sight in case she should happen to hear me and dart. Her gaze kept leaping all over the place, and a couple of times I was certain she'd seen me. But it wasn't until I was almost to her that I saw her eyes widen in fear. Knowing my luck had run out, I jumped forward, snaking my arm through the shelf, taking out a few of the taller books on it in the process, and grabbed her arm. She gave out a strange sound, like a wounded animal, and began to writhe wildly. I could hear the librarians descending on us. So, when her arm broke free of my grip and she took off, I somehow resisted the urge to give chase, pleased enough with her expression of terror. That is, however, not to say that I minded the little bonus of noticing that she'd dropped that book of hers. Did you see what got into that girl? I glanced over with a blink and an innocent shake of my head to the librarian. No clue, I said. Can I help you pick those books up? Well, sure, the old woman smiled. I had knocked over more books than I'd realized, and, somehow, even after seeing her with it so many times, I couldn't quite remember what it actually had on the cover. Just some random thing, against what I thought might have been a blue background. There were a couple that looked familiar. Oh, I left them until last so I could decide between them. Finally, the title of one caught my eye. Oh, this is just what I was looking for, I chirped, a little too loudly, earning myself a disapproving glare. That's kind of an odd spelling, she said. Though, once we were at the circulation desk. It's how my name is spelled, actually, I told her. Oh. How interesting. And, amazingly enough, she actually did sound interested. It's just a weird coincidence, I said, mostly to myself. It would be a neat little curiosity. Perhaps, if the person who had been reading it last hadn't been stalking me. I managed to make it out of the library, just barely, before cracking open the book. I was tempted to flip through, hoping for some pictures, but decided instead to start with the first page, not sure what I was expecting to find. Certainly not what I actually found. Anyway, that's for sure. A.W. Frickelstein, the girl grumbled under her breath, reaching down with one hand to inspect the rip up the leg of her shorts. It wasn't that the girl particularly minded showing off her legs. They were, undoubtedly, the best part of her otherwise large and gangly body. But she'd just bought the shorts 3 days ago. I stared at the words for a few minutes, unblinking. I tried to tell myself it was all a coincidence again. But the words dried up in my throat. What was going on? I tried to read on, but my head was already swimming. And the words began to blur and dance until I felt dizzy enough to fall over. I decided to put it off until I got home, and could devote more time and energy to it. So, I closed Sky's the Limit, and started the slow walk home, alone with my increasingly confused thoughts. It seemed to be a theme for me that day, and not a particularly original one. But that didn't change the fact that I found myself storming out of Mrs. Brown's office in the dance studio and slamming the door. To be honest, I likely could have avoided that. If I hadn't done it earlier in my classroom, and I might have been able to prevent that if it weren't for an earlier incident with Leela. If I had just taken the time to think about it, I would have recognized how ridiculous the whole thing was, considering what had set it all off. But I wasn't quite ready for such introspection. "Hey, Sky, what?" Dale started to say before I brushed past him. Hardly in the mood to trade barbs with him, nor to answer why my classroom was empty while there was still half an hour until his class. He wasn't about to let me go that easily, however. He reached out, grabbed my arm, tried again. "Sky, what in the world is going on?" It started at some little girl's house. Some kid I didn't actually know. Though that honestly wasn't hard to believe. Looking at her. To put it kindly, she wasn't the most athletic of children, and I couldn't quite imagine her as even a preliminary form of the ballerina as the kids who passed through my class. Leela had introduced us, of course. But I can't say that I remembered the girl's name, and I find it doubtful that she was interested enough in me to even listen to my name. Leela and I hadn't really been doing anything special. But I would have been doing straight up nothing if I hadn't been with her. Much like it had been the past few days when I'd gone to find her wherever she was babysitting that day. The people in this house didn't even subscribe to any interesting magazines. So I'd been stuck looking through the newspaper, listening to the music from that CD I'd found the other day. It was strangely relaxing. So I decided to rip it to my computer. Which, oddly, couldn't find any information on it. Then put it onto my MP3 player, and snacking on one of the shortbread cookies Leela had baked for me. Unsurprisingly, there was no interesting news to be reported that day. Nor, did it seem, any other day. It was amusing to skim through the movie listings. For a minute or two. Wondering if I should even bother trying to see if Leela wanted to go see anything that weekend. Even if the answer was yes, we'd probably have to see some kids' show, since, chances were, she'd be babysitting. Again. I'd asked her once what she did with all of the money she made. But she hadn't answered that any more than she would tell me why she worked so much. Her parents were pretty well off, after all, and it wasn't like she ever had free time to go out and spend much of her hard-earned cash. "Do you want to catch a matinee Saturday?" I'd asked finally. Deciding the momentary conversation it would spark would be a better diversion than trying to muddle through some old woman's article on the correct way to plant tulips. "Is there anything good playing?" Leela had glanced up from the game of Candyland she and the girl were playing on the coffee table. "That's not the point," I'd rolled my eyes. "We should just go to the movies together, you know. We used to go all the time." That wasn't strictly true. But I remembered going with her family a couple times when we were little. Back when the theater was in a completely different and far cooler building. Even if it had much fewer screens. "So that means there isn't anything good, huh?" she'd asked. Sharing some secret smirk with the girl. "Oh, come on," I'd whined, moving from the armchair I'd been sitting on. Flopping down on the couch behind her. At least until she cleared her throat and I sat up with a sigh, to get my feet off the upholstery. "You're no fun, you know that." She'd smiled at me, friendly enough, shaking her head slightly. By all accounts, her comment was innocent enough. Unfortunately, I hadn't quite been able to see it like that. "You know," she'd said, moving her piece on the board. "Maybe I should start charging your parents." "What?" She'd shrugged, pulling another card from the deck. "Well, all this time I'm spending with you, it's almost like I'm babysitting you dash." I didn't say anything for a while, but I'm pretty sure she could feel my eyes boring into the back of her skull because she turned around. "I was just joking," she'd said upon seeing my expression. "Yeah, whatever. If you want me to leave you alone, just say so." "Why would I want that, Sky?" "Come on, it was just a stupid joke." But I couldn't help thinking of the book, and what I'd read there. Sky, the passage began, was often afraid that her friend, despite being the more physically childlike, saw her as just another kid to watch. And that was part of the reason they had stopped hanging out as much. Perhaps, that part of her mind thought. Leela was finally accepting that Sky was growing up. And, as such, wasn't interested in being around her anymore. Ever since reading that, I'd been trying to convince myself I didn't really think that way, nor did Leela. After all, it was just a book, right? Never mind the fact that it had described me and Leela exactly. It wasn't like we were unique. No matter what our kindergarten teacher had tried to tell us. And never mind that it had detailed the incident with my shorts. Though at that point things were getting a bit freaky. But I'm not the only person in the world to rip an article of clothing in the park, I'm sure. To be honest, I hadn't gotten any further than that before stuffing the book into a desk drawer. Hearing Leela says that, after reading that part of the book, was too much for me, I guess. I have to go, I told her stiffly, getting back off the couch and heading for the front door. It was just a joke, she'd repeated. Yeah, you're a freaking comedian, I'd said, before slamming the door shut behind me. I don't think I really intended to be quite so dramatic with it, but it was a windy day outside. By the time my ballet class rolled around, even I had to admit that I wasn't in the best of moods. And, considering I hadn't done anything else that day besides mope, occasionally staring at the drawer I had hidden book in, it was pretty clear what I was unhappy about. To me, at any rate. My students weren't in the loop. So when I saw one doing pretty much the complete opposite of what I had just told them to do, I don't think she picked up that my yelling at her was more me working out my own frustrations than me actually being angry at her. I didn't really get a chance to find out for sure, however, before she ran out of the room in tears. If anyone else here can only listen as well as her, I told the rest. Get out. One timid little girl, not particularly talented, took my advice. Well then, I'd said, now we can all concentrate. But any expectations that the remaining students would perform any better were quickly shattered. Did you practice what we learned last time? I demanded after a particularly frightful attempt from them of reproducing it. A couple of them were actually honest, shaking their heads shamefully. Some of them nodded. Most of them didn't do anything. You can't just do this during class and expect to get it. I could remember all the hours of training I'd done, and felt a bit like an old woman, though I managed to prevent myself from saying, "Kids these days are so lazy." Back in my day, out loud. I can't teach you anything else until you learn this. I turned the music back on and walked past the rows of confused girls, following me with their eyes. By the time I'd gotten the door open, one of them had the courage and stupidity to ask, "What are we supposed to do?" "Practice." I'd barked at them. "Get it right so you don't waste my time next class, too." But I wasn't going to be there for the next class. I could tell that pretty much as soon as I closed the door, only to find Mrs. Brown, the owner of the dance studio, waiting for me in the hall. The angry-looking parents, two of which already had their sniffling kids with them, were a pretty big clue as well. So, when I left Mrs. Brown's office, I can't say that I was in the best of moods, nor that I was thinking straight. The latter was made perfectly obvious when, after a minute or two of glaring at Dale after he'd asked the question, I suddenly found myself kissing him. I pulled away, just as surprised as he appeared to be. I have to go," I said, blushing before I turned and ran away from him, trying to ignore the desire to lean back in towards his lips. What was I thinking? I didn't like Dale. I liked Keith. Even if Keith didn't like me. Which I still couldn't bring myself to believe. Not after how long we'd been together. I slowed down pretty quickly as soon as I'd gotten out of the building. A little annoyed at myself to find that I was kind of disappointed he hadn't followed me. I started back towards the door. But the only people to come out was the mother of one of my students, with her daughters in tow. I'd seen the older daughter before since she was in my class, and pretty decent, but I hadn't seen her younger sister. Even I had to admit she was pretty cute if a bit silly looking dressed as she was, with a tutu skirt on over her cut-off jean shorts, which were themselves over a pair of rainbow-striped tights. I shook my head, telling myself I hadn't really wanted to see anybody else anyhow, and turned around to start the walk home. After a couple of minutes, I thought to pull out my cell and call Mom. She didn't answer, probably in a meeting or something, so I left her a message, telling her I didn't need her to pick me up at the studio. I thought that I was walking slowly, just trying to clear my head. But even so, I managed to beat my mom home. I went straight to my room, closed the door quietly, this time, ND over to my desk. I stopped there long enough to question what the heck I was expecting. Did I really think the book actually had all the answers, or any answers, for that matter? It was just a book that, by some weird coincidence, had a few similarities to my life. That was it. But, of course, if that was the case, then there would be no harm in looking at it, now would there? Surely after the first few pages, I'd realized that those coincidences were just that when Sky and Leela went off and had some kind of strange, magical adventure together. I'm not sure if I was expecting the book to have vanished or something, but I felt a sigh of relief escape my lungs when I opened the drawer and found it still there. I started by just opening to the first page again, making sure that it was still the same. Then I started to flip through it. I stopped a little way in, a certain paragraph catching my eye. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door on her way. The sound scared her. So, in her mind, she blamed it on the wind, assuring herself that she wasn't that touchy about having her fears confirmed. It became much more difficult for her to believe that. However, when she found herself still angry enough by the time her ballet class had started to start taking it out on her students, all of whom, most likely, Leela would rather spend her time with, since their parents would, and in most cases, did, compensate her for paying attention to them. I very nearly closed the book then, and I considered following that up with setting it on fire. Though I didn't actually go through with either. How could this be possible? Still, I had pretty much been hoping for something like that. Something to tell me that there was more to the book than just featuring characters that were similar to me and Leela. But now that I had that confirmation, I had a new question. Had I gone too far, or not far enough? What question was I really looking for the answer to? Finally, I decided to go back a few pages. I had intended to go a little further, but Keith's name came up quicker than I'd expected. "Listen, guys," Keith said from the shadow of the doorway. Not even daring to go inside. "I don't think I can do this." "What the hell are you talking about, man?" Martin asked. "You already did it. She was holding us back and you know it, man." I stopped there, staring down at the words in shock. Was that what they really thought? I was holding them back? Please. My singing was no worse than Martin's drum playing. Maybe I wasn't perfect, but did they seriously think they could find someone better in this town? "Yeah, I know," Keith agreed with half of a shrug, though his shoulders didn't quite find their way back down. "But I can't be around all this, not now. T reminds me too much of her." My heart stopped there, along with my eyes, while my brain did its best to censor out the first part of his response so it could focus on the end. He missed me. Martin and Chris must have forced him to break up with me, I decided. One of them probably had some hot chick they wanted to impress, and they were planning on offering to let her take my place in the band once I was out of the picture. That had to be it. But now that I knew it, what was I supposed to do with that knowledge? I couldn't very well go up to Keith and say, "Hey, I read in this book I found that you still liked me. So why don't we both tell the stupid band to go screw itself so we can go out? If he missed me so much that he couldn't stand to be in Martin's basement. Though. Maybe just seeing me would be enough to make him do all the work for me. Of course. I couldn't just go over to his house. Not without some sort of an excuse. I sighed, eyes wandering around my room while I tried to think of one. Until they landed on the stack of Keith's CDs sitting by my CD book. Perfect. I started to stand, only to pause over the book for a moment. Should I look forward and see if this was a good idea? Maybe just a peek, to be sure. Would there even be an answer there? I hadn't gotten far enough into the book to know if there was anything in it past that day. Even if there was, would looking at it, especially if it told me that going to see Keith now was a bad plan, change things? If that changed things, had my looking at the part that told what happened in the basement while I wasn't there done anything? Honestly, thinking like that made my head hurt, and wasn't getting me anywhere. I slipped a bookmark in, then closed the book and stashed it back in my desk drawer. There was only one more of the cookies Leela had made me left. So I decided to eat it for good luck, and resolved to call her back. She'd left me a few voicemails that afternoon that I'd ignored. Andy apologize when I got home. I'm going for a walk. I called towards the kitchen after quickly changing into some normal, slightly nice clothes. I'll be back in time for dinner. I didn't wait for an answer. I noticed my hands were shaking when I opened the door. So I put my earbuds back in and started playing the music from that CD again to try and calm down. I'd have to remember to ask Keith where he'd gotten it, or at the very least, what group it was. A block or so away, my car pulled up next to me. Where are you going? My mom asked through the window. Just going for a walk, I told her. Do you want a ride? I shook my head. I'll be back for dinner. She nodded, pulled back out into the street. I watched her drive away, then continued on towards Keith's house. Turning the volume on my MP3 player up a little to try to cover up the sound of my heart thumping in my chest. The past ain't through with you. I blinked a couple of times. A great number of questions running through my head, not the least of which was, where am I? Looking around gave me a quick, quite basic answer. On a sidewalk. But that didn't help me very much. It seemed like a familiar sidewalk, yet there was something strange about it, something that made it feel unfamiliar at the same time. That feeling only grew worse when I stood, making everything start to spin slightly. I reached up to take my earbuds out, wondering if it might not help to be able to hear as well. It might have worked better, were I on a less boring street. But it's the thought that counts. I was starting to get a headache just from looking around. As my eyes tried to take in everything, something it normally would have had no problem with. But now, when everything looked wrong in some way I couldn't quite place, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to sit down. Other than the sidewalk. However, there wasn't really any place to do so. What had happened to me? My memory felt fuzzy. Hard to focus on. I wondered briefly if I'd gotten mugged, but that wasn't really the sort of thing to happen in this place. Certainly not while it was still bright out. So what then? I could recall looking at the book. And grabbing the CDs. And heading out. And I thought I remembered a car pulling up next to me. But there didn't seem to be anything connecting any of that with where I was now. In fact, I realized, looking around, I didn't even have the CDs anymore. Had I gone to Keith's already? Why couldn't I remember it? Could it have gone that badly? But wait, there was something else. Something right on the edge of my memory. I had a feeling it was important somehow. If I could only figure it out. I decided to sit down after all. Even closing my eyes as I did my best to concentrate. Putting everything into trying to salvage that one piece of the puzzle. Before it was too late and my memory erased it forever. overwriting it with some insignificant little thing. Like how many lights were on in the house behind me. Or the sound of a car a few streets over, or the shape of the mailbox a block down. That last thought made me pause. Heart fluttering momentarily as I realized that perhaps it was a clue to what I was trying to remember. Before I could figure out how, unfortunately, I found myself pulled out of my meditation by a sudden feeling of warmth around my bottom. My eyes sprang open as I forced my bladder back under my control. I hadn't had an accident in, well, I couldn't even remember how long. Certainly, a very long time. What was wrong with me? How serious was whatever had caused this sudden loss of memory? I glanced down at the crotch of my pants, making sure I couldn't see a wet spot there, while lifting my bottom and feeling there as well. Luckily, it seemed as if I'd stopped myself before causing any serious damage to anything beyond my panties. Not that that wasn't bad enough. But while I was checking, I noticed a few other things. First of all, my pants had seemed to have grown appliques of ladybugs on the pockets, staring up at me with smiling faces. Secondly, my shirt, which was a bit low-cut, I admit, had grown an extra patch of fabric, nullifying that act of immodesty. However, the third thing made that rather irrelevant, as I realized that, somehow, I no longer had anything to show off with a shirt like the one I had originally put on. My hands darted up to my chest, as if expecting to find my breasts hiding there. What's happening? I asked out loud, followed by a gasp as I heard how high my voice had suddenly become. A slow, impossible realization dawned on me considering why everything had seemed so odd when I'd come to, or whatever I'd done. Everything looked huge, far bigger than it should. I reached up further, to my hair, pulling some in front of my face. All of it was blonde, as was the handful from the other side I looked at. My hands looked smaller, too, more soft and fragile somehow. My fingernails painted bright pink, a color I hadn't tolerated in years. Oh, crap, I whispered, letting go of my hair before clenching my little hands into fists. What the hell is going on? At another time, it might have been funny to hear my kiddie voice cursing. Even as lightly as that, but I wasn't in the mood to be amused. It was the book. It had to be. This was some kind of punishment for looking at something I wasn't supposed to, and trying to use that knowledge for my own gain. I should never have chased that girl down. She was probably a guardian angel or some weird thing like that. Or, even if it wasn't the book's fault, it had to have the answer as to what actually did do it. Right? And some way to change me back. Assuming, of course, that I ever could do that. Then again, if the book was somehow the cause of this in the first place, would trying to solve it with the book just make things worse? Or maybe using the book like that was something she wasn't supposed to do. So there wouldn't be anything in it about this at all. Of course, it was possible the book had no connection to this whatsoever. But people didn't just become younger, no more than they just found books about their own lives. Having both things happen to you, in so small a span of time, seemed like much too big a coincidence to ignore. But really, I reasoned, people didn't get younger. That was impossible on a whole other level than the book. Since I'm pretty sure it broke a few laws of physics or something. I was dreaming, most likely, or I'd done some weird sort of drug while I was at Keith's. Which probably meant we had patched things up, at least. A quick and painful pinch ruled out the first. Common sense should have ruled out the second. Since, as far as I know, Keith wasn't into any crazy, illicit substances. Nor would I normally have partaken in them if he'd offered. If he was, though, and we'd just made up, then I guess I might have been a little more willing to try. I must have been. But that didn't help me at the moment. What was I supposed to do? Should I go home, not knowing what I was going to wind up seeing next? If this stuff was powerful enough to make me actually feel like my body had changed. I tried to ignore that I'd never heard of anything that powerful. consoling myself when I failed by reminding myself I didn't have extensive knowledge of such things. Who knew what would happen? My parents were going to know something was up if I started seeing my food get up and dance on my plate or something. Because I doubted I could just pretend that I wasn't seeing something like that. I'd just go back to Keith's, then. I'd call my parents, tell them I was going to eat at Leela's, maybe even spend the night, then head over there. I could get an explanation of just what the hell he'd given me at the same time. It was as good a plan as I was going to come up with. So I reached into my pocket for my phone. But what I found there wasn't my phone. Sure, it was a phone, and it probably worked, but it was much clunkier. And cheaper looking. My real phone was probably made mostly of plastic. Too, but it wasn't nearly as obvious as it was on this one. I flipped it open and was greeted by a couple of frames of an animated sun smiling and waving at me. My stomach began to tighten up into a knot. I'm going crazy, I mumbled out loud. Maybe I should have Keith come get me instead of trying to make it to his house. If he wasn't fried, too. His number wasn't listed in my contact list, though, nor were the vast majority of my friends' numbers. The home was right on top of the list, with my parents' cells under that. My grandparents were in there, too, but other than that, the only other number was Leela's. I tried to remember Keith's number, but all I could come up with was the area code. And the first 4 numbers. Which didn't do me a lot of good. I looked through the phone numbers again, and finally, I bit the bullet and pressed the dial. It took you long enough. Leela answered her phone, sounding a little annoyed. I was wondering how many times I was going to have to call and apologize to your voicemail. Leela, you have to come and get me. I blurted out, surprised to find myself sniffling. I don't know what happened, but I'm freaking out. Calm down, she ordered, going into the voice she used when she was babysitting. Any other time, I'd have found it annoying, but it actually was a little soothing. Where are you? I glanced up and down the street, trying to figure out the answer. I think this is Oak Street. I'll borrow my mum's car, she said. I'll be there in a minute. Thank you, I sighed in relief. Thank you so much. No problem, she assured me. See you in. Oh. I interrupted. Can you call my parents and tell them I'm eating at your house tonight? She paused for a moment before answering. Are you? Yes. Then I guess I can. Just sit tight. I hung up, set the phone down on the sidewalk beside me, and hugged my knees to my chest. How did I get myself into this stuff? Or, rather, why did I let myself get talked into it? Was I really that helpless to Keith's, admittedly not inconsiderable amount of charm? I had only let him talk me into trying marijuana once while we were going out. But after getting him to take me back, or perhaps during the course of convincing him to do so, I'd let him talk me into whatever this was. How desperate was I? It literally was only a minute or so before I heard a car on the street, and looked over to see that it was Leela's mom's. It might as well have been Leela's, really, since her mom and dad worked the same schedule and rode into work together in her dad's car. But every once in a while her mom would take it out somewhere. A moment later, I heard my phone ring. Your parents were acting really weird. Leela informed me as soon as I answered. But it's fine. You're clear for staying over tonight if you need to, too. Thanks, I said, confused. But why are you calling to tell me? Well, I'm on Oak Street, but I don't see you. So where do you think you really are? I thought you might mean Oak Drive dash. But that's all the way on the other side of town, Anne. I see you, I told her, feeling the knot in my stomach twist. And tears start coming to my eyes. I'm right here. Where? The only person I see outside is some little girl. She stopped as she saw me wave to her, then her voice took on a chilly air. Is this some practical joke? She demanded. You really had me scared, Sky. It's not a joke, I whimpered, star. I was 3 years out of school and working as a stringer for several local publications. My degree in journalism hadn't propelled me into the life of luxury I hoped, but after some struggle, I had lined up a regular series of papers and magazines that would print my work. The pay was lousy, the hours sucked, but I did have the freedom to pursue material that interested me. As a closet fetishist, I had taken a recent liking to pen stories about local clubs that were off the beaten path. Sure, I pursued the soccer fans at the only Irish pub in town and looked into the Red Hat ladies who met twice a month to drink tea on the southeast end of town, but I was also looking into the secret fetish clubs. Until now, they were all a bit too far out for mainstream papers. I was stunned by the number of people in my metropolitan area who were into swinging and pony play. But I knew I hit pay dirt when I stumbled on Samantha's Sissy Playhouse. From the website, I gathered that her home, which doubled as the clubhouse, was actually a place for local crossdressers, ranging from sissy to TV to full transgender, to come and be themselves. We emailed back and forth and she was thrilled at the idea of having her business profiled. The address was a secret, only available to those who requested it from her website, but she happily emailed me the location on my promise of keeping the Playhouse's neighborhood and address a secret. For as long as I could remember, I had sissy tendencies. I started as a diaper lover and teen baby, but by the time high school concluded, my attraction grew to include women's clothing. By the time I finished college, I had experimented with everything thanks to the internet, although my actual dressing and real-life experiments were quite minimal. Part of me longed to join Samantha's club, but I knew my high-profile job made any public display of sissiness impossible. Still, a girl can dream. At the appointed date and time, I drove up the lengthy, private driveway to a stunningly large mansion in the hills outside town. I parked in the driveway and walked the steps, positive I had the wrong place, until I saw a pink sign on the porch that read Samantha's Playhouse. I rang the doorbell and before long, a gorgeous young woman answered. This stunningly beautiful brunette introduced herself as Samantha and ushered me excitedly into the home. Dressed in a simple pink summer dress with her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her natural beauty radiated from her petite, 5'2" frame. We exchanged pleasantries before she asked me to sit in one of the chairs in the sunroom, a porch-like area in the back of the house. She offered me a glass of water before sitting. I set out my tape recorder and we began to chat. As our conversation ran on, Samantha told me that the Playhouse came about as she was studying for a psychology degree. During a class on human sexuality, she realized that cross-dressing, in its simplest form, is not necessarily a sign of homosexuality or the desire to be completely a woman. It is merely a stress relief for men. Like any hobby, there were myriad variations, including some men who truly wanted to be women, some who wanted to be treated as women, some who were aroused by the clothes, and on and on. She also realized that most men who dressed did so in secret because there was nowhere acceptable for them to express this desire. To serve that need, she had created the Playhouse. A safe, discreet, completely anonymous place where men could behave as they wished, take their dressing to whatever reel they liked. My throat was dry as I listened, dying to grab her hand and shout yes. You understand. But I did not. After about a half hour, she asked if I would like to take a tour. I eagerly agreed, and that's when she asked if I would like to try on one of her outfits. In order to fully experience the club. Joking that it was for journalistic purposes only, I heartily agreed. With that, Samantha led me to a room off the main entryway. Inside were 3 private dressing rooms and the largest closet you can imagine, full of all things girly. Costumes, dresses, lingerie, you name it and she had it. In all different sizes as well. Samantha rummaged in the racks for a minute before handing me a simple pink sweater and denim skirt, pointing me into one of the changing rooms. We giggled back and forth together through the curtain as I changed. The skirt sliding up my legs and the tight sweater hugging my chest felt like heaven. When I exited, Samantha applauded, telling me how cute I looked. She took me to the room next door, which was a full makeup facility complete with dozens of wigs. She quickly fastened a simple, bob-cut brunette wig to my head and applied a light touch of blush and lipstick. The smells were heaven and I could barely keep up the friendly banter we were having. Samantha then led me upstairs. She explained that the downstairs was kept as a normal home but the upstairs gave the girls who visited free reign. Each room we walked into was pure heaven. A full dance studio with ballet bars and Pilates equipment. Bedrooms made up for a baby, toddler, and adult woman. She explained that the girls liked to explore different fantasies and each playroom was designed to fulfill as much as possible. She had stay-at-home moms who lived nearby come over while their offspring were in school to play with the club members. That offered everything from diaper changes for the abs to girl talk partners for the full-grown girls. When we finally got back downstairs, my head was spinning and I could barely walk straight. Samantha asked if I wanted to share another drink with her or if I had to run right away. Not wanting to leave, I agreed and sat as she poured us each a diet soda. So, Samantha suddenly asked, "Will you be signing up for a membership?" I nearly choked on my drink and tried to play it off as if she were kidding. She was not. "Sweetie, I can see it all over your face. You may be a reporter, but I can tell you're a sissy too. From the way you've let your hands dangle femininely against your skirt to the way you just smoothed your skirt when you sat down." I blushed uncontrollably, realizing I had been having so much fun I had given myself away. After a moment of prodding, she took my hand and gently told me it was okay. That this was a safe place. I broke down, crying a bit, and confessed that she was right. I told her everything, that I was one of those straight men who loved to occasionally be a sissy. While I thanked her for the kind offer, there was no way I could afford the very steep membership rates. Samantha kept the rates high to make sure only serious members joined. At that point, Samantha hugged me, took my hand, and led me back to the front entryway. She pointed to a small desk outside her office. She told me that her dream was to make that desk a display case. A place where a sissy she created could work as her assistant, greeting guests and serving as a testimonial to the wonderful impact of her club. She would love to let me fill that seat. That is, if I wanted to. The arrangement would be simple. I would take a 1-week vacation from writing and come work for her. She would give me lessons on how to be a proper lady and train me on the job as her assistant. If at the end of 1 week we were both enjoying the arrangement, she would make me a job offer. It took less than a second for me to agree and I was told to report first thing the next morning. The following 7 days were pure heaven. Each morning I would arrive at 7 and be welcomed with a hug from Samantha. I would then enter one of the dressing rooms and put on the outfit she selected. Tan tights every day to begin to disguise my leg hair. Then panties and a simple outfit, typically a knee-length skirt and a long-sleeve top. She would then apply a different wig each day, letting me try looks from a tight bun to pigtails to a layered, Jennifer Aniston look. Finally, my makeup. Foundation, blush, and eyeshadow. Macassar and lip gloss to complete the look. From there we would go about our day. Each guest had to give at least a half-hour warning, which provided us time to lay out their outfit in the dressing room and prepare any activities she wished to participate in. This week, each girl had the option of including me in her visit, to which every sissy happily agreed, thrilled to have a playmate. Some days, we would simply sit and talk in the living room. Other days were a bit more adventurous. Stacy asked me to join her dance class, taught by a friend of Samantha's in the dance studio. We both dressed in traditional ballerina outfits and worked through graceful, elegant princessish moves together. Kathy enjoyed being a little girl and loved the idea of having a playdate. Samantha dressed us both in diapers and short baby doll dresses, feeding us from bottles and changing us when we wet. The week flew by and before I knew it, it was the last day of our experiment. I hoped against hope that this would work out, but silently fretted that the salary wouldn't be enough to cover my rent, or that perhaps Samantha was displeased. We had booked that last Sunday afternoon out to be together, so we could enjoy some time alone and discuss the future. As a special treat, Samantha offered to let me pick my outfit for the day. When I emerged from the dressing room in that short pink baby doll she dressed me in to play with Kathy, she giggled. She said that outfit wasn't complete without a proper diaper. She led me by the hand up to the nursery room where she laid me down, eased my dress up, and began applying powder. She asked if I had fun this week and I nodded. She slid the diaper under my bottom and taped it tightly before saying that she too had quite a fun time and would love to continue having me as her assistant. But she stopped. "I don't want you to be my employee." My heart sank as I realized she would likely ask me to work part-time, for free, as she couldn't afford to pay me full-time. Quite the contrary. She explained that her parents were quite wealthy and had given her a large sum of money to pursue her research. Her father was actually a sissy as well, and they felt her efforts were a great cause. She then explained that she had grown to love me over the past week and hoped I would move in and be her sissy forever. My jaw dropped and all I could do was cry from happiness. Samantha hugged me tightly as I said "I love you too" over and over into her shoulder. 6 months later. Samantha and I didn't waste time. I gave notice to my publications, ended my lease, and moved my stuff in almost immediately. My family was thrilled that I had found someone so well off so I could focus on writing my novel, and her family loved having another sissy around. I accumulated my own private collection of clothes. But I also kept my boy clothes. At my choosing, I could go out in public as a guy, meet my friends, even have them over, provided they stayed downstairs, of course. But when it was just Samantha and me, my male name Alex turned into Ashley and I would run around the house. We got married 4 months after our first meeting but held a second ceremony for the club members with 2 brides and no. "So what's this I've heard about a protest tomorrow?" Toby's mother asked when he arrived home from school. "Something to do with the boys not being allowed to wear shorts." Yeah, some of them are going to wear skirts tomorrow," he replied. "So they claim anyway." "And are you going to be involved?" "No," he bluntly retorted. "Why not?" "Because it's a stupid idea." "But wouldn't you like the option of wearing shorts when the weather's hot?" "Not really," he shrugged. "I only wear shorts when I have to." "Well, don't you think it's important that the boys who'd prefer to wear shorts should be allowed to?" she asked. "Yeah," he replied. "Course." "Then maybe you should take part in the protest," his mother suggested. "Nah," he replied. "It's a stupid protest and I'd look stupid in a skirt." "Have you worn one?" "No." "Then how do you know you'd look stupid?" "Because boys don't wear skirts." "They will be tomorrow," his mother smiled. "Anyway, just because boys don't normally wear skirts doesn't mean they'd look stupid if they did," she added, reminding me that boys and men in Scotland and Ireland often wear kilts. "Yeah, but we're not in Scotland or Ireland, and a kilt isn't a skirt." "The skirts at your school are very similar to a kilt," his mother retorted. "Being pleated and plaid, she's not wrong." "Yeah, but..." Toby began. But he didn't have anything to say. After a short silence, he asked if he could go and get changed. "Homework first," his mother replied. "Oh," he whined. In the last few weeks, Toby's mother has decided that he's not allowed out of his school uniform until his homework is complete. This was in the hope that he'll do it sooner rather than later. "You know the rules, Toby. School isn't over till you've done your homework," she reminded him. "Okay," he moaned, before grabbing his school bag and heading to his room. "Mum," he hollered from his room. "Yes," his mother hollered back from the kitchen. "Why is there a skirt on my bed?" he asked from the landing. His mother appeared in the hallway below. Her face bore the broadest of grins. "It's for tomorrow," she told him. "But you can try it on now if you want." "I told you that I'm not getting involved," he replied in exasperation. Why not? His mother asked. It's a peaceful protest and you should get involved, she stated. I bought it especially. Toby's mother has always been a keen protester. Only last summer she was protesting against fracking. In her youth, she protested against the poll tax. As well as this, she had camped at Newbury for a couple of months. She marched against the bombing of Iraq. More recently, she had marched against the government's penny-pinching austerity policies. She strongly believes that if you want something, you have to at least stand up and be counted. Through a combination of logic and pestering, Toby reluctantly donned the skirt. It's really short, he whined. His fingers hovered nervously around the pleated hem. It's certainly not too short, she said. Most of the girls wear them that length, she added. I'm not a girl, he said, putting his hands on its waistband. And the waist should be lower. That's where your waist is, she informed him. Not on my trousers it isn't, he stated. It's not a pair of trousers, she stated. Turn around, let me have a proper look, she asked. It looks ridiculous, he moaned as he kicked out his foot, bearing a black leather lace-up shoe and a wrinkly grey ankle sock. No, it doesn't, his mother claimed. But it could look better. How? Well, you could pull your socks up for a start, she smiled. He sneered and said his hairy legs looked stupid. They're not that hairy, she said, before suggesting that he get on with his homework. He asked if he could put his trousers back on. No, she said. You can get used to that for a while. Oh, he whined. She gave him the look. He sighed and slumped at his desk. His pale fuzzy knees knocked nervously together as he shyly smoothed it over his lap. Actually, you can do your homework downstairs where I can keep an eye on you. Oh, what if someone comes round and sees me? You're practicing for tomorrow's protest. What's there to practice? He quizzed. All we're doing is wearing skirts. And that's what you need to practice, she replied. He adopted a bemused expression. For a start, you need to remember to keep your knees together, she said, drawing his attention to the fact that his had parted. He snapped them shut. She smiled and informed him that he needs to learn how to not flash his underwear. Come on, she said. He bundled his books and pencil case and followed his mother downstairs. His skirt swished with every step, and whilst it didn't feel uncomfortable to wear, he certainly felt uncomfortable wearing it. As they descended the stairs, Toby told himself that he'd avoid his reflection in the hallway mirror, but his mother had other ideas. She drew him to a halt at the foot of the stairs and he had no option but to face himself. It looks quite nice, his mother claimed. My legs look stupid, he said. His grey socks stand halfway up his calves and the pale fuzzy hairs make his legs appear out of focus. They'd look better with different socks on, his mother said. They look stupid because they're hairy, he replied. They're not that bad, his mother insisted before setting him down at the kitchen table to do his homework. She instructed him how to sit without scrunching the pleats and to always smooth them over his lap. She'd infrequently say knees as she pottered around him and he'd instantly snap them together. She suggested putting him in a pair of frilly knickers to encourage him to keep them together. She suggested wearing a pair of shorts beneath it. None of your shorts are short enough, she informed him. And I was only joking about the knickers. Just try to remember to keep your knees together, she advised. Toby sat and did his homework whilst his mother did the ironing. Their supper simmered on the hob. He began to shut his books and put his stationery away. Have you finished? She asked. Yeah, he replied. Can I get changed now? He asked. I think you should keep it on until bath time, his mother replied. Of course, he whined at this suggestion. But his mother told him that he'll be wearing it all day at school tomorrow, so a few more hours tonight won't do any harm. He wore it whilst eating and wore it whilst washing the dishes. He wore it whilst watching TV and got used to wearing the unusual garment. But he still felt it looked stupid. His mother said that didn't matter. In fact, it's the core of the protest, she claimed. Toby reiterated that it's not so much the skirt, but his legs. The following morning he sits at the breakfast table, nervously shoveling his bowl of cereal into his mouth. "I'm going to feel like such a ninny today," he moans. "No you won't," his mother claims. "Plenty of other boys will be wearing skirts. And if you believe in having the right to wear shorts in the future, you've got to make a stand now." He knows she's right but would rather others make the stand, and he didn't. Having tried the skirt for size the previous evening, Toby knew it looked stupid with his hairy legs and boy's grey ankle socks. His mother addressed that by giving him a tube of Veet and a pair of nice socks. "I look like a girl," Toby moaned as he looked down at his hairless legs and scallop-topped ankle socks. "No, you don't. You look like a boy in a skirt," his mother replied. "At least now your legs look nice rather than stupid," she said. He's as nervous as hell as he grabs his school bag before being shown to the door. His mother tells him how proud she is before he steps out alone. Ironically, the 5-day heatwave is drawing to a close and the air is distinctly cooler than previous days. The breeze is up and he fears it might catch his skirt and reveal his underpants. He keeps his hands ready to grab it should that happen. But not having any pockets, he doesn't really know what else to do with them. The first group of schoolboys he sees is all wearing trousers and he begins to worry that he might be the only one. But as he nears the main road and even more groups of school kids, he breathes a sigh of relief when he sees other boys have joined in the protest and are attending wearing the girls' uniform. He sniggers. They mostly look ridiculous, especially the older boys with stubbly chins and really hairy legs. The girls laugh and coo. There's a handful of journalists and photographers at the school gates chatting to a group of maybe 10 or 15 skirted boys. He and many others avoid the cameras. But they can't avoid the attention of the girls. All in all, he figures there are maybe 50 or 60 boys taking part in the protest, so he's certainly not alone. But so far as he can tell, all of the others are wearing their skirts considerably longer than he is. And the girls waste no time in pointing out that, unlike the others, he's had the good sense to shave his legs and wear some nice socks. Glumly, he tells them that he didn't shave his legs but used some cream that his mum had given him. "I didn't really want to. Not just for one day, but my mum insisted," he reluctantly informed the crowd that had gathered around him, and a handful of other skirted boys. "It's not just for one day," one of the other boys claimed. "It's till the end of term. Or until they change the uniform rules. Whichever is sooner." Some of the others said they were only going to do it once, to make a point. Tomorrow, they'll be back in long pants, or shorts if they are allowed. Having removed the hair from his legs, it was presumed that he was in for a long protest, possibly lasting until the end of term. A whole 5 weeks away. The boys involved weren't punished for taking part in the protest. In fact, their endeavor was praised by many teachers. However, it was suggested that they don't wear skirts again tomorrow because they've made their point. "So how was school today?" his mother asked upon his arrival home at around 3:15 p.m. "Okay," he mumbled. "Can I get changed?" he asked. "Have you got any homework?" "A bit," he replied. "Well, you can change after you've done it." But can't I at least put my trousers on?" "You've got a uniform on, that's all that matters," his mother replied. "Were lots of other boys wearing skirts today?" she asked. "Not really, a few." "Really?" his mother replied, sounding surprised. "It's all over Facebank and from what I could tell, plenty of boys turned up wearing skirts today. Some estimate as many as 70, she informed him. "And you'll never guess what?" "What?" "You made it on the Today program." "Just a brief glimpse." "But it's clearly you," his mother said. Toby wasn't entirely sure what she was on about. So she opened up her laptop, logged into Facebank, and quickly found the brief video someone had posted. It's only 20 seconds. She paused it at just the right moment and tapped her manicured nail on the screen. There, see, she grinned. Toby's jaw dropped. Oh God, my skirt's really short, he realized. No it isn't, his mother claimed. It's all the other boys, theirs are far too long. Everyone kept saying it was really short but I didn't think it was that bad. It's not really short, she insisted. It's the same length the girls wear them, high mid-thigh, she told him. Were they impressed that you'd shaved your legs too, she asked. I didn't shave them, he insisted for the umpteenth time. You know I didn't. Well, epilated, his mother retorted. I bet the girls were impressed. Some of them said they looked nice, he humbly replied, sneering a little. But loads of people took the mickey out of me. I'm sure plenty of boys were being teased. They were wearing skirts after all. Even the boys wearing skirts were teasing me. But more because of my socks than my legs. I bet the girls liked them though, his mother smiled. Anyway, I also read on Facebook that you'll be keeping up the protest until the uniform policy is changed. Nah, most of them said they were only doing it for the day, to make a point. Meaning some of you will be keeping up the protest, his mother replied. And who knows, even more boys might turn up in skirts tomorrow. I doubt it, most of those who did today said they wouldn't, he told her. And the teachers said we shouldn't. Why? His mother quizzed. You have every right to a peaceful protest and you have every right to continue that protest, she claimed. It's not as if you're breaking any rules. I know but. They talked extensively about how certain freedoms have to be fought for. The suffragist movements. Workers' rights. Women's rights. Gay rights. Women would have never got the vote if they'd only spent one day protesting. And if it wasn't for the workers' uprising. Boys like you wouldn't even have the right to an education. You'd be working 12-hour days, 7 days a week with no holidays and low pay. If you want something, you have to fight for it, she claimed. Adding metaphorically, that is. Yeah, but I'm not that bothered about wearing shorts. It's supposed to be a fight for the greater good. Not a personal struggle, his mother claimed. I protested against the poll tax on behalf of those who couldn't afford it. I marched against the invasion of Iraq for the people who live there. I'm neither gay, trans or disabled but support their rights, she went on. Toby listened with intent and raised a few contrary points of his own. But his mother, being a seasoned debater, easily refuted them. So, I'm wearing this tomorrow whether I like it or not, he mournfully asked. You may as well. Giving up at this early stage is pointless. And it can't be that bad. It's just a skirt, his mother reckoned. Much against his better judgment. Toby attended school the following day wearing the skirt again. The numbers engaging with the protest had dwindled to around 30 boys in the entire school. But fortunately for Toby, he wasn't the only one in his class. The other boy who'd been quite vocal about keeping up the protest until the uniform rules are changed had also returned wearing a skirt. At break and lunch, the skirted boys gravitate to one another. Chants of "We want shorts" are quickly quelled by the teachers who tell them that if they want to exercise their right to protest, they must do it quietly and orderly. Concerned that the teachers were trying to stifle their democratic freedoms, the boys decided to try to recruit more to their cause. Toby isn't keen because he's not as keen on the cause as the others assume he is. If he'd had better debating skills he'd have never worn one in the first place. And given the choice, he'd rather wear long trousers than shorts anyway. But his lack of debating skills gets the better of him. He ends up going with the majority. He even ends up helping to produce the campaign leaflets. He helps to write a rousing article for the school magazine, using some of his mother's arguments and examples of why it's important to stand up and be counted. The following week, numbers are up and by Wednesday, around 50 boys turn up wearing skirts. How was school today? His mother asked. Did you cope okay in the rain? Yeah, I guess, he said. Truth be told, walking to school wearing a short skirt in the driving rain was probably better than wearing trousers. His legs dried out far quicker than a pair of trousers would have. The rain had cleared by lunchtime, but the temperatures had dropped considerably after the recent heat wave. He casually mentioned that it was a little bit chilly and wondered how the girls cope when it's really cold. They wear tights, his mother replied. Not all of them, he countered, listing a handful of girls who somehow managed to brave the entire winter in either knee or ankle socks. True, his mother said. She claimed that girls are just tougher than boys in that respect. They're used to baring their legs and have simply become more acclimatized. She tells him that she'd buy him some tights if he wanted. No way, he blurted. They'd think I was a right ninny if I turned up wearing tights. I had a feeling you'd say that, his mother said. So I bought you some knee socks instead. She passed him a paper bag and he delved inside. Mum, these are girls' ones. Toby moaned. And so are the ankle socks you've been wearing. I know, but at least they don't have patterns. The next day, Toby was the brunt of numerous taunts and teases thanks to his Pellerin knee socks. He tried to hide their girly style by scrunching them down to the ankles. But the rule for the girls is if knee socks are worn, they must be pulled up, and his teachers insisted that he was too. Plenty of girls praised his socks though. Coupled with the fact that he's got rid of his leg hair and wears his skirt nice and short as most girls do. They've come to believe that he's the only boy who's actually trying to look nice. Little do they know that if it was up to him, he'd have never gotten involved in the stupid protest in the first place. After 2 weeks of promoting their campaign, it seems that around 50% of the boys have joined in the protest. They were now regularly attending school wearing skirts, either sourced from their sisters or bought specially for the ongoing protest. Their parents seem to be backing them. The teachers seem to think they're going too far. And the headmistress, deputy and members of the PTA are reported up in arms regarding the continued protest. After 3 weeks, there's a significant breakthrough. The school has decided to review their uniform policy. But it's not enough. They don't want a review. They want change, and they want it now. Some 30% of the boys continue wearing skirts throughout the following weeks. As the end of term nears, they feel victorious when it's announced in the morning assembly that after a lengthy protest, and plenty of consideration from both staff and PTA members, from the beginning of next term, boys and girls will be permitted to wear short trousers if they wish. A joyous cheer erupts in the hall. It takes a few moments for the headmistress to quieten them down. The revised uniform regulations have been posted on the notice board and the school website has been updated, she informed the assembly. Hopefully this ridiculous protest will cease here and now, she sternly said. One of the boys put his hand up. So, can we wear shorts tomorrow or? I stated quite clearly that the new rules will come into effect at the beginning of next term, the headmistress impatiently retorted. If you feel it's too warm for long trousers, David, then, by all means, wear your skirt tomorrow. The assembly is dismissed and they head to their respective classes with a strong sense of triumph. Their sense of triumph, however, is short-lived. At morning break, a handful of pupils bother to read the new uniform regulations on the notice board. The rumor spreads quickly, and during lunchtime, seemingly half the school are trying to read the new regulations. What the headmistress failed to tell the assembly was that from the beginning of next term, long trousers will no longer be permitted. How was school today? His mother asked when he returned home. Have you heard? He asked. Heard what? About the changes to the school uniform rules, he said. His mother shook her head. Well, we can wear shorts from the beginning of next term. That's wonderful, his mother exclaimed. I told you that it's worth standing up for what you believe in, she smiled. But noticing her son's total lack of enthusiasm said, That's good news, isn't it? Not really, he moaned before informing her that they won't be allowed to wear long pants anymore. Not even in winter, he whined. I see, his mother cautiously replied. Well, they do say be careful what you wish for. He raised an eyebrow at his mother and slumped onto a chair, arranging his skirt on his lap as he did so. I wouldn't mind, but I wasn't that bothered about wearing shorts. It was your idea that I got involved. And it was you who chose to continue the protest, she said. I only expected it to last for one day. So did I, he muttered. It was the others who pestered me into carrying on. And what do they think of the new rule? His mother asked. They think we've been had, he replied. And we have. Even the girls are annoyed with us. Because they can't wear long trousers either, she asked. Her son nodded, slumped into his fist, and sighed through his nostrils. It's gonna be freezing in winter, he grumbled. It's not gonna be that warm in September, he added. So, what are they like? His mother asked. He shrugged and said he wasn't sure. It's on the school website apparently. Oh, I'll have a look later, she said. Aren't you bothered by it? He asked. Don't you think it's unfair? He quizzed. We wanted the right to wear shorts. Not to have our right to wear long pants taken away, he claimed. Well, you could always boycott the shorts. No one's making you wear them. What, and wear this instead, he retorted, sneering at his skirt. Well, you've been wearing it quite happily so far, his mother reminded him. Quite happily is something of an over-exaggeration. Toby's been more than willing to wear his skirt, but only for the cause he'd been swept along with. Not wearing it would have let the others down. I'll be wearing my trousers tomorrow, he grumbled. And every day after that whilst I still can. It's entirely up to you, love, his mother replied. Have you got any homework? Yes, he replied. Well, you get on with that, then you can get changed, she told him. And pull your socks up, you know I don't like it when they're wonky. Toby kicked his feet out in front of him and straightened his socks, making sure that the pelerine pattern was straight and the tops were level. He completed his homework, then changed out of his uniform and hung his skirt up once and for all. Later that evening his mother tells him that she'd had a look at the school website. She told him that the new school shorts aren't anything like she'd imagined. I thought they'd be cargo-style shorts. But they're really quite short, she said. How short? He asked. An inside leg between 1 and 3 inches. Which means they'll be about. She placed her hand high on her lap. That short? No way, he gasped. That's shorter than my skirt, he added. Even with knee socks they'd be freezing in the middle of February, he presumed. Not if you wear tights, his mother informed him. I can't wear tights. You can. It says so, she replied. I'm not wearing tights, he stated. You won't be saying that in November, she knowingly claimed. Toby found himself in denial. Maybe his mother was winding him up. Maybe she liked the idea of sending him to school in short girly shorts when a longer, more boyish style is permitted. His mum was always complimenting his legs and saying how nice it is to see them for once. It was her who pestered him into wearing a skirt in the first place. And it was she who suggested he remove his leg hair. She even bought him some girls' knee socks. They looked better with his skirt than boys' socks did. Toby had just let himself get pestered into wearing them. Maybe it's just his mother's ploy to buy him some short girly shorts. He checked the school website himself and his heart quickly sank. It states quite clearly that the black tailored shorts must have an inside leg between 1 and 3 inches. As well as this, either white ankle or knee socks. Or plain black tights must be worn. Mum, what's denier mean? He asked as he sulked at the laptop. It's the thickness of nylon, she replied as she approached. Checking the new uniform rules, she asked, noticing the school's webpage on the screen. Yeah, he sighed. We have to wear white socks too. White socks are nice, she replied. I'm gonna feel like such a ninny wearing black shorts and white knee socks. Well, you can still wear a skirt if you prefer. You've been wearing that with knee socks for weeks. Only because it was a protest, he whined. I'm not gonna wear this again if I can help it, he sneered, grabbing at its pleats and letting them drop. The next day at school, not a single boy turned up wearing a skirt. Those who'd been most active and vocal in the protest toyed with how they might protest against the new ruling. They could defy it and continue wearing long trousers next term, risking detention, suspension or expulsion. They could contact the press and argue that the new rule isn't just punishing those who protested, but also those who didn't. We need to get some girls involved, one suggested. They've lost their right to long pants too. Well, whatever we do, it's got to comply with school rules. That was the beauty of our shorts protest. We complied and there was nothing they could do. Toby replied. I think I'd rather wear a skirt, one of the boys reluctantly suggested. Those new shorts look too short for comfort, he claimed. The others agreed that the shorts look far too short, but aren't quite so keen on continuing to wear their skirts. I guess we just have to swallow it, one of the ringleaders suggested. We still won, we just got more than we bargained for, he claimed. We got made fools of, more like, Toby said. I should never have let you lot talk me into this. You were just as much a part of it as us, they claimed. You wore a skirt on the very first day. You wrote the campaign leaflets. You were handing them out too. I know, Toby grumbled. I just got swept along with the protest. It was exciting. For a few days anyway. Toby confessed. Then it just seemed to snowball. The others muttered their vague agreements. They'd all got swept along with exercising their right to protest. They couldn't resist the sense of rebellion and camaraderie that came with it. They'd geared themselves up, got themselves organized, and weren't going to back down until their goal had been achieved. They had access to the photocopiers, the print room. They made leaflets and posters, wrote articles for the school magazine, campaigned throughout their break times to get more kids on board. All in the name of the cause. Throughout the last week of term, all those who'd been most active in the protest were frequently berated by those who weren't involved and even some who were. They were criticized for not being clear enough in their campaign. They should have proposed a particular style and stated that shorts should be optional. They should have argued for a referendum, giving the pupils the chance to vote between the existing rules and the new ones. But no. They demanded the right to wear short pants to school.